Dun, 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 dun. Let's see, what have I got up here that I can pop on there? Just waiting to get the notifications out there. We'll see who comes in quickly or unquickly. Yeah, we're still a few minutes away from the appointed start time, so we'll just let this run. I'll run the countdown and then get into it when we've got some extra people with us. Hello, Facebook. I'm wondering, is that you, Naomi? Let me know. Actually, do let me know where you are listening from. If you're new, let me know. We'll say hello. Just let the notifications get out. We're a little bit before the appointed start time. Somebody, let's just wait and see. Where's my profile? Back to putting things out on Twitter. What have we got? A few people have had a look, so that's great. Hello, if you're watching on Twitter. I don't think I can't see you in the room, so that means you're not able to leave comments. If you would like to be involved, come into the chat room and say hi as we watch this replay. thebirdemergency.com/live has all the links for the Facebook, the YouTube, and the Twitch. Hello, Facebook. Welcome aboard. Let me know where you're listening from, where you're watching from. I've added Twitter into the mix today, so we'll see what happens. We're still a few minutes away from the appointed start time, so just a minute or so. We'll let that tick over, and then I'll run the countdown, and then we will get right into it. And this was one of my favourite discussions over the last year, I guess, with Ursule Ellenberg. And I forgot I was going to talk about the year ahead because I was distracted by the Twitter beef. So we can talk about the year ahead. I think I'll find that the questionnaire I sent out to authors, to guests. So we'll get on with that shortly. 2468. There's 3:30. That's start time. So let's run the countdown and get into it. Oh. G'day bird nerds, happy new year. I'm Grant, I'm a bird nerd. This is the Bird Emergency. Isn't it fashionable to say summer series or something along those lines. It's not quite a best of, but it's some of my favourites that I'm rerunning We'll keep doing this over the next week while people are away doing things and relaxing, resting. So, if you haven't met me before, I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. Today we're talking. Today we're going to rewatch the conversation I had with Dr. Ursule Ellenberg, who's based in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and we're talking about the Fiordland crested penguin. It's one of the rockhopper family, and its Maori name is the Tawaki, which is the one in common usage nowadays. So, without further ado, let's run that. I'll be here. You can ask me questions, make comment, whatever you like, and if I know the answer or if there's any new news, I will let you know. Okay. When it clicks. Come on, go. Bird Nerds, I'm Grant Williams. This is the show where I get to speak to really clever people who are studying and unlocking the secrets of really amazing birds. And the entry criteria is that they're kind of endangered, threatened, critically endangered. And today, we're back in the Southern Hemisphere today. I'm speaking with Dr. Ursule Ellenberg, who is a penguin person. Hello, Ursula. Thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. Hi, Grant. Good to meet you finally. I only know you via Twitter. Penguinologist.
Sorry, I was just laughing and thinking, oh no, she's read my Twitter feed. She's seen my ranty Twitter feed.
I do occasionally when I get distracted. Yeah.
Tell me whereabouts are you located? You mentioned New Zealand, the long white cloud, but you're not up in Auckland and the Sea Petrel Gulf area, are you?
No, we're down south, southern girl down in Dunedin, and we're kind of working around the southern South Islands and the subantarctic islands. So we miss out on that terrible storm, luckily. But yeah, we have other things to deal with down here. So it's bloody cold, actually. Do you want to see?
Oh, yeah.
We're back in winter.
It's the middle of summer and you have a lap rug. That's fantastic. Yeah. That's so New Zealand. That fits all the cliches. The only thing you haven't done is said, "Hey, bro," or
yeah.
Now, Ursula, tell us a little bit about the habitat that the penguin that we're going to be discussing, the Tawaki. How's my pronunciation?
Tawaki is perfect. Yeah,
Tawaki. So, or
never Tawaki. It's a Tawak.
Tawak. What we knew about this bird in bird books when I was growing up is that it was called the crested Fiordland penguin. Is that the old name? So,
yeah.
Is that how you refer to the bird now in scientific literature, or has the Maori name been widely accepted in general communication?
I guess we're making it more popular. It's like the official Fiordland crested penguin. It's quite lengthy and a mouthful. And Tawaki is unique. Everybody, it might not be the big seller because calling yourself the Tawaki Project and not have penguin in there, people miss you, so we dropped that code word penguin to draw people in from around the world. But I hope by talking more about Tawaki, people start to care about them, because he's not a penguin like any other penguin. They're very special, unique penguins. And you asked me about the habitat. We've just been over there, it's coming back now to molt, and you go, it's quite rugged and remote. Imagine yourself kind of crawling you've been to Milford, you've seen Milford, for example, if you picture Fjordland, these really steep fjord
we've all
falls.
seen pictures. We've all seen
Yeah.
pictures of Milford Sound.
Come over, man. It's you need to see it in life, because it's still, after so many years, it's breathtaking being in these deep fjords. You have these sheer walls that drop down hundreds, thousands of meters actually, and waterfalls and things, and in between there little nooks and crannies, old boulder fields where now ancient forest grows on top, and it's a tangle in several stories. So imagine it's like a multi-story apartment with these thick roots and old moraine boulders. And Tawaki, they don't nest like other penguins and big colonies. They're kind of tucked away in between these old moraine boulders and tree root caves. So you get down on your tummy and crawl and I need to send you some pictures. Like you disappear in that network of old moraine boulders, and it requires some guts to work with Tawaki, because then you turn a corner and kind of follow your nose. You feel a bit wild, and you smell, oh, there's penguin, and then you go turn a corner, and then you have your Tawaki nesting in a little a beautiful nest bowl with a few sticks, decorated stones, and looking after their fluffy chicks, hopefully. And then you go take another nest you can count.
One of the things I noticed when looking through the website is that there's a lot of fallen timber in the environment. So there's lots of old trees, decaying trees, and whatnot. And let's set the scene for people who whose only experience of penguins perhaps is through David Attenborough kind of shows and whatnot. You have penguins that nest on ice floes and on beaches, and incubate eggs basically on the feet of one parent, keeping it off the ground. Then you have penguins that excavate their own burrows, and our little penguin in Australia is like that, and the New Zealand little penguin, or how do we say that? Hoi-ho?
No, the hoi-ho is the yellow-eyed penguin. It's the kurara. If you listen, because Maori used, describe how they're calling it, the kia, kia or kaka, like these famous parrots, the korora. And you've heard probably little penguins calling in Melbourne, just off the pier when they're coming back. They have these contact calls, go quack, quack, and then they come and have this mutual display and go korora, korora. And so that's your korora. And the hoi-ho is the noise shouter. It's more like a very high-pitched, I shouldn't do that. Are we live?
Yeah. You can. This is the most entertaining part of the discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
I got off the track a little bit. For a change. But the Tawaki is different in that it's not a burrower, and it's not nesting on ice floes like the Antarctic and the subantarctic penguins. But I was curious when I was looking at all the photos of the habitat and these birds poking their heads up from fallen logs and whatnot. Do they make use of things like hollows and crevices that naturally occur when trees fall over each other and spaces are left? And like you mentioned, that these beaches or these hillsides are formed by boulders that were expelled from volcanic eruptions.
No, that's all glacial.
Oh, it's all glacial rubbish that carved out from the mountains. Okay, so do the penguins utilize those crevices, or do they, like you said, there's a nest bowl that they decorate? Do they have to have a clear space? What do they need?
Oh, it's like a hobbit hole. You go. They find these nice dry, lovely spaces between old moraine boulders or in tree root caves, and then they make it their own. They excavate it a bit more and make a lovely nest bowl and move in, make it cozy, bring that one leaf, and put it somewhere and just own it, and then they shit all over it. and that's how you find them. Following your nose.
Are, are they utilising their renovator's dream to to uh, anthropomorphise them? Are they utilising these nest scrapes or clearings or whatever they've made for themselves all year round, or are they disappearing out to sea for extended periods?
Yeah, no,
What's the
absolutely.
life? What's the annual cycle of
Mm.
a tawaki?
Okay, a Tawaki currently, they just came back to molt, which means where they fatten up during their pre-molt journey, which they just over the last 6 weeks, they've been all the way down to the subantarctic front, some 2,500 k's, like a 6,000 kilometer round journey. And now they come back weighing twice the weight, can barely walk. They go up the beach, are humongously fat, and fall a few times over and then luck themselves into the forest and find a nice little nook where they can hide from the weather, but still have access to some drinking water and some wind when the sandflies get too pestering, and shed all their feathers at once. So that's most birds will lose a feather here and there during their annual cycle. Penguins, they need a dive suit. It's like if you imagine a penguin feathers being more like scales, and thousands of them overlapping each other. They form that dive suit, and once they have holes in that dive suit, they don't like to swim in that cold ocean. So they need to fatten up first, go ashore, shed all their feathers, which is called a catastrophic molt, and it looks catastrophic. It looks like a kind of a firecracker in a down pillow experiment going wrong, and some people get really worried about it because they look really shitty. But the best you can do is leave them in peace when they're in that stage, because they need all their energy. They don't need to be freaked out. They need all that energy, all that fat. Half of their body weight gets metabolized into these new feathers. And then in another 2 or 3 weeks, they have this shiny new dive suit. They take for a spin around the fjord, fatten it a bit, oil it another couple of days to make it really shiny, and then they take off on a more leisurely, maybe 4 to 5 months winter migration, where they head again down to the subantarctic front and hang out. Like it's not. It's they actually, if you picture it, they go now, since we've worked on them, we know now they're going south and past Tasmania, further west. So you can stand on the shores of Tasmania, wave them as they pass, and find a really cool spot for fattening up and preparing for the breeding season. So back in the days when we started, we had no idea. We just knew they disappeared and then they would come back again. So sometime in late July, August, to set up a nest and start incubating. And they're winter breeders. So when we try to work with them, we actually have to, battle snow down to sea level, and it's crazy. So winter breeders, they set up shop, usually hatch their eggs in September, and mid-September, mid-October is kind of the key chick rearing period. And as chicks hatch and are really fragile, like very fine down, and need dad to look after them as they grow, because they can't thermoregulate themselves as they're really little. And mom's out foraging, like mom's the hunter in the family, so she's out foraging, bringing back food for the little one, and poor dad starving on the nest and getting really thin again. But proud dad steps up, and eventually the chicks get big enough to be left alone, and then both parents are out foraging and feeding that chick until it's fat enough and ready to learn what it takes to be a penguin during its first year at sea.
So many questions, but the first one, when they're out at sea after they've molted, and when they go out to sea to fatten up, and they sort of hang a shallow right turn at Tasmania, are they still hanging around in a loose what do we call it? Would that be a flock or a school? what what or if they're on top of the sea, would it be a raft? What?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, you would call them like little penguins come in as rafts, kind of find safety in numbers, and then as the night falls, they come and waddle across the beach quickly, so no eagle can pick them up or and eat them. Tawaki don't have that problem, so they do socialize in the fjords and have fun, kind of going for a spin with 3 or 4 other mates. And actually, we've deployed camera loggers we recently developed, and last season had a really nice spin. I need to send you the link of a girl taking off with a few of her girlfriends, and just the sheer speed they zoom through the water, and you can tell they have fun before they go out and do the hard day's work foraging and feeding the family. But out in the deep Southern Ocean, there's so few Tawakis. They kind of all take the same general direction, but they'll be pretty solitary. There might be a couple hanging out together, but we're talking about so few birds. They're not going out in a big team. They spread out.
That means I must ask the question: what's the estimated population, and how reliable do you think that population count is?
Okay, the initial, when we started with our project, the official count was 5,000 to 7,000 birds. And then we started looking, and we saw so many more. Then it was mind-boggling, actually, because those are counts. Fjordland or the West Coast, they're really difficult places to get around. And there's been a fantastic work in the early 90s by McLean and colleagues to go and try to get to a population estimate. And for example, we have one person on the team. You might know Robin Long, daughter of the Long family, raising New Zealand's remotest family. She grew up with Tawaki in her backyard. And like back in the days when she was little, it took them 3 days to get out there. Now she runs the 50 k's or so to her family home in a day with a light pack. But she started counting penguins on the West Coast, and those same areas that McLean and people counted. And in that one example, McLean searched with 4 people for 2 days and found some, and I need to look up the numbers, some 40 something penguins and nests. And then Robin came in and kind of, it looks like as if over the last 10 years the population would have dramatically increased. You know, it's really, she found every year she went back in to search for nests, she found more, because she reckons it took her about 5 years to learn where to look and how to find them. And now over the last couple of years, the numbers have stabilized at 370 pairs, roughly. So that's tenfold of what we initially thought was there. So we're at the very beginning. We don't really know how many there are exactly, but we can say there's a lot more than we thought there would be. So and that's amazing news that we actually have a penguin species, especially crested penguins. They're really struggling, declining. We lost of the rockhopper penguins more than 90% of the population, and here we have a penguin, the Tawaki, that's doing exceptionally well. And it's just, so reassuring. Mind you, they still need a lot of help because they nest too close for comfort to people. People are often the problem for wildlife, as you know, Grant. But they're doing much better than we thought. And I think you got to celebrate that good news.
Definitely. It's not that often that we hear good news when we talk about endangered rare birds. It's generally the other way around. For birds that spend much of their life at sea, one of the great threats causing mortality is fishing.
Mm.
Now, is that a problem for Tawaki? And let's broaden it out to the New Zealand penguins in general.
It's like penguins are pursuit divers, so they go and follow their prey, and thus they won't be going on long lines. Like there's one example of a penguin being foul hooked through a flipper accidentally, but it's not like the albatross that die being hooked on long lines. Penguins drown in nets, and particularly in gill nets or set nets, as we call them here around New Zealand. They're a huge problem, particularly for the yellow-eyed penguin. And we don't quite know how much of an impact it has on Tawaki, but any net that is in a Tawaki foraging area will catch Tawaki, and there are records of Tawaki being caught in set nets. Tawaki like during the breeding season, just like they have some preferences, and they like to forage quite coastal, quite close to these kelp forests. And that means anybody is going, for example, for butterfish, would potentially catch Tawaki as well.
So, is there a large part of their both their molting range and their foraging range, because they have two sort of two parts of the year, don't they, where they're feeding close to shore for part of the year, and then for part of the year they're heading off to the subantarctic. So are they often frequently in places where gill netting is common, or are they, and is it close to shore? Is the problem for the netting a New Zealand problem, or is it an international problem?
No, in fact, for our penguins, it's very much a New Zealand problem that we need to manage, and it should be easier when you think about it, because internationally it's much harder. But for example, the yellow-eyed penguin, they are just occurring in New Zealand, so you'd hope that is something we can make happen, make their life easier.
Jacinta, listen up.
Yes, we'd hope. We have all the solutions. We just need to get behind it and make them, implement them, make the sea a safer place for penguins. But for Tawaki, I'm glad to report that along the west coast and in Fiordland, there's very little overlap. So I think set netting in the southern fjords and around Stewart Island will take the odd Tawaki, but at the moment, it's not a threat for the entire population or species.
Okay, now for international listeners who are not New Zealanders, the west coast is the bit that is facing Australia, and the Fiordland is the other side that faces out to the Pacific and
no. It's all on the west coast. So
we have all the west coast.
It's all the west coast. We have the west coast, we call the northern part of our west coast, and then it drops into Fiordland, where you have these really deep fjords. It's still on the west coast, and then as it comes around,
Stewart Island's round off the tip, sort of on the east coast, isn't it? Okay, so how far round? So the stronghold is on the west coast, which is when you're looking on your school atlas, children, it's the bit facing Australia and round to the bottom.
Yes.
But how far, let's say, around the corner do they occur, and do they nest any further up the east coast, the Pacific coast?
Yeah. So Tawaki have the most restricted breeding range, actually, just over a mere 500 kilometers. And we had this year, for the first time since a long time, a nest in Bluff, actually. So all the way down really south. And we had, back in the day, some records where a pair attempted to breed on the east coast. But they're certainly moltier. So we have the first few Tawaki arriving around Otago currently, and molt, hopefully finding a safe place away from humans and dogs where they can shed their feathers in peace. But yeah, and it's a very restricted breeding range, and yet extremely diverse marine habitat from what I call the West Coast, although you can argue Fiordland is also in the West. The West Coast is kind of continental shelf. And then as you drop down into Fiordland, you have these really deep fjords that as you leave the fjord, drop down into a deep sea environment, like 2,000 meters straight away as you go out into the Tasman Sea. And then you go around Favore Strait, which is that little strait that separates southern New Zealand, the New Zealand South Island from Stewart Island. It's shallow coastal. It might be just 40 meters deep, and they don't forage very deep. They can forage deep if they want to, but why put effort in if there's good food close to shore and in shallower areas?
Totally. People will be familiar with Stewart Island, I think, if they are into rare birds and New Zealand birds, in that the kakapo is also on Stewart Island. So is the Tawaki and the kakapo, are they utilising similar habitats in that part? Like, will you be stepping over Tawaki nests and at the same time maybe see a kakapo scurrying away, or are the habitats completely different?
They are quite different. I might add Stewart Island currently doesn't have any kakapo on the main island. It's on Whenauho or Codfish Island, a small kind of island. That's predator free, because kakapo and predators, introduced predators, they don't go along.
Well, that was where I was going to go next. But let's talk about the differing habitats that they exploit, because New Zealand's been very, very successful in marketing itself worldwide as a tourist destination, but I don't think people really know how diverse the different habitats are. The wild places of New Zealand are, and some habitats are extremely localised. So tell us about that southern portion of the South Island.
Yeah. Oh, I might add a little anecdote actually, because I've came across a kakapo working with yellow-eyed penguins on Whenauho. So we're hiding and waiting for yellow-eyed penguins to return from their foraging trips. And my field helper got really excited and heard, some rattling and crashing around the forest. And it was his first night in the forest. And I was so envious because, like, Ursule, I think there's someone coming. It's like wrong direction. You're heading, like, look to the beach. It's like, oh, there's some, it's really big and it's right next to me. It's a kakapo. It's like, what the hell? I'm working here since decades. And he, in his first night, gets a kakapo walking over him as we're waiting for yellow-eyed penguins. It was amazing. So that really made his night. The next nights were less exciting, but just penguins. But they certainly hang around in these lower coastal forests, these podocarp forests, the kakapo. Or they prefer, they're spreading out across the entire island. They prefer the higher hilly areas when they do the males, especially when they do their booming and attracting mates. But they can they have feet. They might be flightless, those kakapo, but they can cover some distance. Yeah.
Did you just refer to the forest as podocarp forest?
Yeah, the lowland podocarp forest.
So Podocarpus, we're familiar with that genus here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the dominant? Well, I'm assuming it's going to be the dominant tree in the forest. But what kind of, like, all of the photos that I've seen and on your website, there's all these aerial roots. Like, the trees have got these spread out aerial roots as well as fallen logs and whatnot. Is that mostly Podocarpus, or is it is it quite varied in the large flora?
It's incredibly diverse, our forests over here. So We have, lots of, for example, in Harrison Cove, where I've just been last weekend, there's a rock fall, and it's been overgrown by pioneer fuchsia trees, which have, these quirky roots around these boulders from the rock fall. And there's, again, you have kamahi and other beautiful old rata trees. We have all sorts of very diverse trees, and podocarps is a whole group of trees that are kind of just in that in that group, but it's quite diverse as well, and with different habitat requirements. So you go through a West Coast forest, and it's mind-boggling, not only the trees, but all those different ferns and mosses and lichens you have there, and little epiphytes. It's like growing and down in different stories, and you have these fallen big giants. A totara might be fallen, or an old rata tree, and then there's seedlings on top of it that start to grow and be big trees again. So it's a even in a very small, like a hectare, you have lots of different species that it's nowhere like it's it's hugely diverse. You, as a botanist, I think most people look at a forest or some greenery and say, oh, there's grass and shrubs and trees and other green shit, and then you have a botanist going in and going like, wow, and it's just popping out all these crazy Latin names of them. I'm still learning, and it's absolutely beautiful. Like, you never get bored in that forest.
How familiar do you think the general New Zealand public is with that really wild part of New Zealand? Do they understand how complex and unique and amazing it is?
I think the landscape is very much appreciated, like these crazy fjords and waterfalls and things. And a few people would go and be delighted about the diversity of ferns and other bryophytes, I imagine. But I think there's great appreciation for the beauty. Although if you're not able to name different ferns, you can still appreciate how different they look and how beautiful they are, and how decorative they are around a penguin nest, for example. Especially when you grow up, and see all these penguin documentaries and big colonies, and then suddenly you have these elusive rainforest penguins that sneak, on little hobbit pathways into the forest and hide behind some trees and some ferns.
That's probably a point worth exploring. That we are. I mentioned at the start that all of the David Attenborough documentaries and all the recuts that have been done a million times over have got us very familiar with Antarctic and subantarctic penguins. Are New Zealanders familiar, do you think, with the three mainland breeding penguin and what I think, is it 13 species of penguin recorded in New Zealand, or is it more?
No, it's 13 if you, depending on how you split them up. So I'd argue we have
controversy. Yeah, what
it's
is
another whole kettle? Yeah,
well, we've got time to explore it. Let's talk about that. We've talked about three species: the yellow-eyed, the crested fiordland, and the little penguin. Now, the little penguin in New Zealand is a distinct species from the little penguin, or fairy penguin, as we were calling it here in Australia. And sometimes they call them little blue penguins, don't they?
Or just blue penguins, because they're so blue.
Yeah, there's so many common names. There's just,
although you can get confused. Tawaki, when they're freshly malted, sport a very blue coat as well. So they can be blue.
So there's three species that breed on the mainland. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
But
unless you split the little penguins up, and then you have four, because I'd say we probably have two different little penguin species. One, the New Zealand little penguin, that's around most of New Zealand, and comparably less studied than the Australian little penguin that is mostly around Otago. So where I'm based, most of the penguins are actually Aussies, like the little penguins. And as you go further north or around on the west coast, that's mostly the New Zealand. You can call them subspecies. They're probably pretty close to, or there's good arguments to make them two separate species. But I guess you can, it's all definitions. Like we don't argue about it. It's from a management point of view. Yeah, we need to learn more about the New Zealand little penguins because we already know quite a bit about the Australian species or subspecies.
Surely someone's doing a PhD on the genetic work to split those species. I mean, there's a good paper in that, isn't there?
Yeah, no, it's already published, actually. Stephanie
Okay.
Grosser has done that and argued for two species.
Okay. Which camp do you reside in?
I'm not too worried, actually. It's species is just a convention, and you can go with different definitions. Is it a biological species definition or some other species definition? But I think as long as they don't, and you have different, for example, different ducks that all hybridize and interbreed, and we still think they're different species, but in that they hybridize very little. Like there's as far as I know, they breed quite separately. So in the colonies around Dunedin and Oamaru, it's mostly the Australian little penguin, and over, for example, on the west coast we have the New Zealand little penguin, and I'd argue they differ also slightly in shape and size, and some habits. So for example, the Australian little penguin is much more productive, so they can lay 2, sometimes even 3 clutches in a season. There's probably one record, I think, of a New Zealand little penguin attempting they do replacement clutches, but actually raising 2 clutches is pretty unusual for little penguins for the New Zealand species or subspecies. So which means they're more like they can't recover as fast from any disturbance as the more robust Australian counterpart could. And so I'm less worried about whether we call them a different species. I'm more worried about what we do from a conservation management perspective. If we want to safeguard them, we need to understand their biology and habitat requirements, and we need to learn a lot more about our New Zealand little penguins. Yeah, and there's good work being done at the moment, mostly by community groups all around New Zealand.
The good old citizen scientist.
Yeah, I love it.
So we're talking Tawaki, but little penguins are amazing. So just to extend that discussion a little further, if those two populations of the subspecies or species, however we classify them, are quite distinct, are they ecologically distinct as well? Do they occupy different niches within the environment, or is one a functional replacement for the other in the different ranges?
I guess I would split it up even further, because we have such diverse marine habitats around New Zealand that they play different roles in their different habitats, and have if you're a little penguin in Motuara going into the Foveaux Strait, you need to go way further and put a lot more work in to feed your family than you would if you feed off Oamaru, which has very productive waters very close by. And so they go for different species, have their different favorite foraging hotspots and things. And in terms of replacement, we could. I'm surprised, like after all these years, they haven't expanded further. Like they're quite localized. Our Aussie little penguins, they're still in Otago, so they quite like it here, and they're not kind of that invasive, expanding, crazy conquistador penguins. They live next to each other quite happily.
So they're not the rainbow lorikeet of the penguin world.
No.
I look, I probably was misapplying the terminology replacement and whatnot, but I guess what I was wondering about is although they're foraging in different areas and they're not overlapping a lot, and the opportunities to forage are quite different because of the locations they're in. Are they choosing different foods? Do we know that? Like, is the specialization actually got down to their dietary requirements?
I guess they are going for what's there, and whatever the habitat provides, and they need to be adaptable in our changing environments. So they, they do take a diverse prey range, but they like these small oily fish, if they are available, because that's good for raising chicks.
And high energy for the amount of energy that they expend. So
Yeah, exactly. But as I say, we know comparably little about the New Zealand little penguins. So all our knowledge comes from Phillip Island, for example, and other really well-researched colonies around Australia. And then down here, especially Oamaru has been very, the Oamaru blue penguin colony has been very research intensive and have, but again, they have the Australian species or subspecies.
Wow, that's sort of surprising to me. I mean, I don't know much about
the Aussies.
I don't know much about penguins in New Zealand, obviously, because I've been labouring under the misapprehension that all the little / fairy penguins in New Zealand were yours, and that the odd straggler might turn up from Australia.
No, that's all Aussies here, and Otago, Aussies rule.
Aussies rule.
Which is funny, actually, because you'd expect the straggler arriving somewhere on the west coast, but they actually established in Oamaru and around the Otago Peninsula, for example.
It would be really amazing to be able to examine the fossil record, and the modern debris to actually determine
who brought them here.
How it happened, when it happened. But I mean, little penguins do. I mean, they cover so much of the Australian coast. They're obviously great.
Some of them even made it over to Chile.
I
met a stuffed little penguin in Chile, and you wonder, like, how we don't really know much about the southern fjords. Who knows? Maybe they have some living little penguins down there as well. In Chile, I mean, no. So there's so much left around this world we don't know.
And that was really where I was going to go next. I mean, for countless thousands of years, probably, penguins had New Zealand to themselves. They had to share it with the kakapo and the kaka and the takahe and the woodhens and whatnot. But then the Maori arrived, and they started eating Tawaki. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Probably more yellow-eyed. Well, not the predecessor of yellow-eyed penguins. They got eaten to extinction or harvested to extinction some 500 years ago, and but certainly we find all sorts of penguin bones in mittens, because it's a nice parcel. They come and you pick them up and can feed your family. And you can transport them and trade with them. So lots of communities around the world have been eating penguins. I mean, go over Humboldt penguins in Chile. They've been eaten by coastal communities since more than 11,000 years. So, and you as hunters, you change the population because you pick the easy prey, and the survivors are the shy ones. Which means that's why we have so many extremely shy Humboldt penguins. They have learned that people are predators that might potentially eat them. And same with Tawaki and yellow-eyed penguins here. They were just too easy prey, so they grew wary of people.
is there only one known penguin species that has been uh, wiped out as a result of human interference in New Zealand?
And no, there's a crested penguin on the Chatham Islands that has also been hunted to extinction.
Okay, that's not very good, is it? And then
No, well, they don't reproduce fast enough. Like they're
no,
not the chicken that can sustain. Like it's hard to harvest penguins sustainably. I guess they're just slow breeders, and like all seabirds, they live long and start breeding late, and then usually not raise many offspring. So it's not a good species to harvest if you wanna keep the population alive.
I have to remember to come back to this point, but um,
We've skipped already quite a few of your other questions. We could roll
don't
back
worry,
to.
don't worry. It's part of the unique charm of the show.
Yes.
Um, the so after the Maori have hunted at least one species to extinction, then New Zealand was discovered. People discovered New Zealand.
Which is ridiculous because it already was discovered. Yeah.
I know. That's why, of course, that's why I say it. It was, but yes, New Zealand was discovered, and as part of that discovery, very very useful animals like mice and all sorts of
Rats and
stoats
and
and
parrots and yeah.
yeah, all those really good things were brought in. Did you ever get feral goats happening in New Zealand as well?
Yeah, actually, but you can get rid of them relatively easily. Whereas stoats are so clever. And rats as well. They're so hard to get rid of. And so you end up having a sustainable harvest of rats and stoats, unfortunately, rather than really getting on top of their populations.
So I know I've spoken to Andrew Digby about those animals and their effect on kakapo and takahe, but how have they impacted the penguin species and particularly Tawaki?
Mm. They actually do even now. Like we have stoats, and even a single stoat can empty out a breeding colony that go around and see. Stoats are such a different predator from cats. Like a cat is quite a careful predator, and doesn't have nearly as much impact as the stoats on for example, Tawaki. A stoat would go in and on an incubating penguin go, excuse me, and steal an egg from underneath an incubating penguin. And also, for example, stoats go and attack prey that's maybe 10 times their size. So we've got track camera like video footage of a stoat once the chicks are getting left alone and both parents are out foraging. That you have a good size, maybe 2 or 3 kilo big chick on the nest, nice and fluffy, lots of fat and a neck to chew through. And that stoat has been riding for maybe half an hour, chewing their way through the neck to finally kill the chick. So they take big prey. Those stoats there are probably more a problem for eggs and chicks. And I don't know of a single incident where a stoat would attack an adult penguin. They're very well at defending themselves, but you lose the next generation to these predators. So we make an effort or try, because it's a huge effort to stay on top of stoat numbers.
So they're obviously having an effect, but as you mentioned right at the beginning of our discussion, that the numbers for Tawaki are greater, have proven to be greater than the estimates in the 70s. So
In the 90s, yeah.
yeah, the 70s and then the 90s, obviously with the more detailed work. But are you confident that they are now maintaining their population level, or
No.
no?
You can't really talk about population trends if you have no reliable numbers.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
so that was what I was going to get to next.
Yeah.
Is it because we don't know, or is it because we have measured a decline or an increase? It's just simply that we don't know.
We suspect there is an ongoing decline in some colonies, but the method monitoring those colonies initially was quite flawed in looking, at a stationary plot in a forest. And penguins, penguins move in and out these plots and find other places and decide to, breed around the corner. So you have to think bigger and search a larger area. And then it's so difficult to even find all those nests. So we tried double counts, where you send in 2 independent teams on consecutive days, searching the same area, and you mark nests that are found by one team and by the other team. And by that time, you kind of have a simple mark recapture and see which nests had been found by both teams. And in some areas, you have just 70%. You only found 70% of them, and then can extrapolate how many there might be in total in the area. But it's, actual accurate numbers. People don't realize, how hard it is to even get population numbers, let alone population trends, and then see when you have a declining population, what are the drivers. And it's always easy to say, oh, it's fishing, or it's predators, or it's everything on top of each other, and climate change in the mix, changing the marine habitats. And so I'd argue we know a lot about the threats. We know they're having an impact. We are not at the moment in a stage where we can reliably quantify how large that impact is. But we know they're having a hard time with all the other changes where we can't do anything about in the short term. Like we're not pulling the switch on climate change anytime soon, and certainly not us alone here in New Zealand. But what we can do locally is, manage predators, manage fisheries and important foraging areas, and manage human access to colonies, for example, or tell people to please not let their dogs run wild along the beach, because dogs kill penguins. And so it's the cumulative impact rather than
You very kindly introduced the ideas about methodology, about how surveys and counts had been done in the past, and then how monitoring is done now. Can you tell us about how the availability of new technology and things like geolocators, backpacks, camera traps, acoustic recorders, all those kind of things have helped you adapt, and I'm guessing you get much better results for a much less outlay of public funding, which I'm sure
which is quite limited. Yeah.
Well, that's right. I'm sure the government loves to hear that. Good, we can give them less and still get more. So tell us how the study of penguins has changed in New Zealand in the time that you've been involved.
When we first started, they were the first GPS trackers, for example, and they were huge breaks, and we took them down to the Snares Islands to learn more. Back in the days, we knew a lot about breeding biology, but we had no idea what happened out at sea and with foraging ecology. So these new novel technologies that allow us to track penguins with ever smaller devices, and not only two-dimensional, but get the dive depth, and with, if you have your phone and you turn it, with these video games or other, there's an accelerometer in there, like a little gyroscope that can tell you how they turn, and you get essentially a 3-dimensional foraging trip. And then over time, the things got ever smaller. So with these initial bricks, I wouldn't, go back another 20 years when the first people in Antarctica put their first logger on a penguin, just to see where they're going. Have you seen the pictures of there's with a big orange jacket? They look like a Sherpa. Like, I wonder that they even made it to the sea and then didn't drown straight away. Like, it was ridiculously large. And now with the technology we're talking about, matchbox size loggers that have a depth sensor, a salinity sensor, little GPS antenna, and they're bloody expensive too, because it's like you're throwing your laptop computer into the sea and hope the penguin won't wreck it and bring it back, because that's the trouble with these loggers. You have to get them back to read the data.
To get the data. Can I ask you? You just said that they're hellishly expensive for people who aren't in the field. How do you design a study like that, and what does it cost? How many penguins do you need to put your little matchbox recorder? I nearly called it a transmitter, but it's not a transmitter.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you can have transmitters as well. They just have an antenna poking out.
That's right. That's a different thing. So let's first talk about just like the data logger, which is not a transmitter. How much do they cost, and how many do you need out at any one time to make a study meaningful or statistically relevant, or like, because you can't get a lot of information from just one penguin, because it might be a crazy penguin and it might not be doing what penguins do.
Yeah, you've probably seen that cartoon of Gary with a transmitter on his back, and some penguins going in one direction, and Gary goes into the other direction. And they're like, "Oh, Gary, what are you doing?" "Oh, some scientists put a tracker on my back, and I'm heading to Belgium to confuse them." Yeah.
That's right. I'm messing with their heads. Yeah.
No, absolutely. You have some crazy penguins, so you want a few different ones, and ideally you want some males and some females as well. So and then you dream of eventually knowing what the juveniles are up to, but that's an entirely different story. But you're gonna be prepared to lose trackers, because the way we put them on a penguin is it's like essentially with teaser tape on the feathers, and you want to be able to remove the logger again a week later without damaging the feathers, because they need it. You don't want to damage their dive suit, which means some other, like if you go for a longer distance migration, you might be prepared to glue it onto them properly, and then they mold the tracker off, but they got to log that device around all the time, and that's it's quite an impact on a perfectly streamlined body. So if we're working during the breeding season, for example, our larger cameras we would put on only for 1 day, and the much smaller GPS dive data loggers, they carry for a week, so we get subsequent foraging trips. Sometimes they stay out overnight. In extreme cases, in a really poor foraging conditions, they might be away up to 3 days out, but eventually they come back and feed the chick and bring the logger back. And some areas, like in Fjordland, they sometimes do even 2 trips a day, so you get lots of trips, but quite localized. And you need a good base of data. We never have enough. That's the reality, and we're making do of what we can fundraise. These trackers are $1,500, depending on how many bells and whistles per matchbox
per unit.
Per unit, yeah, and you just hope our cameras are more expensive. You just hope they bring them back, but sometimes they're
lost.
They lose them, exactly, because you don't want to have them permanently installed. You want them installed in a way that you can remove them relatively easily again, like recapture the penguin, need 5 minutes to take the logger off and let them go again about their business, like up the hill to feed their chicks. So you try to minimize that impact you're having.
How well do they adapt to being trapped, handled, and and fondled with their scientific equipment. Are they? I mean, it's always a concern. There's all sorts of ethics about disturbing the natural behaviour of any animal in order to study it. Do they adapt well to it? And actually, here's the next question too. I'll throw.
And I haven't even answered all my
No,
funding
no,
wishes. I
well,
thought I would
well,
hold up a
well,
list and say, I
well,
want this one.
well,
But now we are on the next thing.
Well,
again.
we'll
Okay,
go
yeah.
back to it, but this question sort of is really relevant, thankfully, that they're quite long-lived birds. So how long on average can a pair of Tawaki live? And then the link really is, how many times do you think they might be handled if they're in a well-studied colony or population?
We don't have well-studied areas quite yet. We're
Good.
we're just starting with the Tawaki, but we know a lot about the hoiho, the yellow-eyed penguin, and the oldest penguin I've come across that was still breeding was 25 years. And you could see, like in old dogs, you sometimes see these kind of getting the gray face and these eyebrows.
Well, I know about that.
No offense. Yeah, and that penguin, certainly looked quite old. And it's, I haven't seen it again, but they can. I think they with Tawaki. I'd if I had to guess, that there will be some in the wild, and I've seen some really old penguins, but they were not marked. But like males with a huge honker, and that beak continues to grow and quite gray in the face, in the top face. Saying that because juveniles look super old. Like if you're 1 year and you have a gray beard and you look like you're done for life, and they look so old, and yet they just survived their first year, or must have been a really hard year, and then they mold into the pretty adult plumage and look nice and shiny and young again. Wish we could do that, Grant, actually.
Yeah, that's right. That's a really good factoid that I didn't know, and I'm going to assume that it's common across penguins, that their bill continues to increase in size. Their bill is not like other features, like other bones, that once they reach a mature age, that's how big they are. But their bill just continues to thicken and become like the antlers of a deer.
What a shock! How can you compare it?
Well, that this thing grows. Of course, the deer molt them off, but it's probably more cattle's horns or something. But do you think that a big bill is like a really nice tail for a bird of paradise? Like, is that?
No, not at all. They're just the hunker to defend their territory. So you have different sizes. Like penguin, like people always look at penguins and think males and females look the same, and they don't. Like once you work with them, the male is like in Tawaki is a kilo heavier, has a much chunkier bill just to start with. So even a juvenile male can have a huge bill, and there's always some size difference. They're very minute females, and some that are quite bulky and almost as strong as a male. And you can have pairs where the female actually is slightly larger than their male, but in general the male is quite large. They need to defend the territory, and a big honker helps them. And they have this nice hook that they draw blood. You need to know how to handle them if you want to attach a logger, but they have a hook, and as they use it, of course it needs to grow and be, it's just like their toenails, they or our fingernails, things just grow and get replaced as you use them up. And that's a big trouble actually with some zoo penguins that don't have enough to work off their beaks. Then they get this overgrown, funny, sometimes crossbill beaks that just or hooves or something you need to maintain. A wild horse running up some crazy scree fields will work their hooves much more than a horse on a paddock. So so it's not growing, quite as fast, but it's certainly there's a trend that older birds often have bigger bills. So, and that's just like we don't have and we're still we just started to mark birds. So for Tawaki, it's a gut feeling. A lot what I say, I don't have the hard data quite yet, because we're just now. If you mark an old bird, you don't know how old it is. You know it's adult, and then you can follow it through and see it a couple of years later again raising a successful a chick and say, oh, you look bigger, mate. You had a really and bigger in terms of they grow twice as fat just in preparation for the molt, as you know. So they go through very big phases and quite slender phases with the breastbone poking out after molt if they had a hard season. But that beak, you can always tell whether it's a male or female because that honker is really standing out. And I can send you a few cool pair pictures.
Always love penguin pictures and being able to share them around. We were talking about the cost of that particular data logger, and I'm guessing that the transmitters are probably a bit more expensive, and it costs a lot of money to have people in the field. Person hours is usually the largest cost of any kind of project. And you said the word fundraising. So Tawaki project is fundraising. Is that right?
Yeah, of course, always, because we are running that project on the smell of an oily rag, and with lots of passion. So you imagine even getting into these remote fjord areas. We're piggybacking on a fantastic support by local businesses. Southern Discoveries have taken us under their wings and provide us with free boat rides, and we can use their kayaks to get to breeding colonies. And further south in the fjords, we're collaborating with Fjordland expeditions. On the west coast, we have the Greenstone helicopters that allow us to hitch rides out to those colonies. So logistics is a huge thing. And we're absolutely grateful for that big community that's on board and helping us and supporting us in the field, because, as I told you earlier, it's really hard to get governmental funding for any long-term project. You in science, you want these quick, sexy projects and not following things through, varied marine environments and over many seasons. And
which is one of the structural problems, isn't it? It's a real structural problem with finding quality research, and that people like yourself have to design studies that may not be the studies that you want to do, simply because it's the only way that you can get anything funded. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, it's like you got to make do with what you have. And anything we're learning about them is more than we knew before. But in an ideal world, you would have more devices and you would have more people in the field, and you'd ideally have be able, because currently most of the people in the field last season, we didn't have anybody on a salary. Like we've been all, including myself, working for free in our time off in order to get that sort of data. And I have really skilled, great people that work with us since a long time, and I would wish I could offer them a salary, but at the moment we can't. And they're still on board and still passionate. And but I think conservation suffers from always assuming that people work with passion and for free, and somehow they gotta feed themselves as well.
And that's one of the great problems, isn't it, about conservation? Because I'm associating myself just because I sit here and do things for no pay, but I'm not. It's not. I'm not a scientist, right? You guys are. are increasingly expected to do things without pay, but you don't get people in other parts of government and the community being expected to do their core work for no pay. Like the government doesn't say, we're building roads, we're going to build this great new highway, but nobody who drives a truck is actually going to be paid their full wage. We're going to pay them 10% of the value of their output. I mean, that just doesn't happen. But in science, it seems to be accepted because you're all doing good work. It's one of the things I really hope can have a small impact in changing. I don't think people actually understand that Tawaki project is something you do, but it's not what you do for your job.
No. It's an expensive hobby. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about Tawaki project. Who's involved? Tell us a little bit about the team, and then let's recognise the people who are supporting you. And are there any formal affiliations with universities or other bodies as well? Just run us through how it's done.
Yeah, there's plenty of formal associations. Well, we started the Tawaki project back in the days. The first recce trip was almost 20 years ago now, in 2003, out to Breaksea Island. That's when I saw my first Tawaki, together with my partner Thomas. And we always wanted to know more about them because there's so little known about Tawaki. And it needed another 10 years, actually. And the opportunity, I had the opportunity, because in my spare time, like for a job, I work as a scientific consultant, and also affiliated with Otago University at the moment, doing lots of teaching. And that's a whole different story again, like trying to have maintain face-to-face teaching under RED. But we started, and I did a contract for DOC, working across several different conservancies that didn't normally talk to each other on the West Coast and Fiordland and the Southern Islands. And we suddenly realized, hey, this is an opportunity. We have all the key players here on the table, and they're all interested in Tawaki. Let's start a project where we learn more about Tawaki, learn more about how many there might be, their breeding biology, in the different areas, their breeding success, and especially their foraging ecology, their marine ecology, what they're doing out at sea, because we had no clue what happened with them. And so we started very little, and with a bunch of international friends, actually, because, in the seabird community, you know people. And New Zealand is exotic enough that you go, hey, Clemens from overseas, Clemens Pitts, the director of the Antarctic Research Trust, for example, he came over and brought some devices, some satellite trackers for us to put on penguins, and other people, especially important, the Global Penguin Society. Pablo Garcia Boboroglu is our contact. He's Argentinian and works closely with the University of Washington. So there's lots of people around the world. A good colleague from Cape Town working for Suncorp, for example, came over and helped. So we have a team of keen scientists that came in their spare time, come over and to help with the Tawaki project. And then we have a bunch of really cool students and community workers that just say, okay, I make time for a week or two to help you out during the breeding season. And we had last season, I mentioned Robin Long before. She's fantastic. She's been with us almost since the beginning, since many years now. And then we have some that come back, for example, GIS specialist from Christchurch, Lindsay Chan, was with us in the field last season. We have very keen students at the moment. We have Jeff White, who's doing a PhD. He used to do a master's with us, and he just started his PhD, now expanding south into the other fjords. He worked in Doubtful last season. He's based in Miami, and then we have, and we just got featured yesterday, in fact, on the, if you pull up University of Miami, the main webpage, you'll see my photo of a Tawaki and a curious chick kind of looking around dead. It's pretty cool, like featured on that webpage with a direct link to the Tawaki project. But I want to mention Blake Hornblow as well. He's our master student, and he did really great work together with Jeff and Doubtful Sun this year. So there are students coming and putting their enthusiasm and their heart into the project, and we have lots of international scientists that look, including, for example, Tom Hart, you might have heard from Penguin Watch, who said, I have a few spare track cameras. Do you want them to monitor Tawaki nests? So it's coming as it's a puzzle of enthusiastic people and gear and big dreams. But yeah, slowly we're heading the right direction and starting to know more and more about our elusive forest penguin.
I'm really encouraged that there is that sharing of expensive gear
risky
between people. Well, it is risky. People need to recognise that it's a gamble, because but in the southern hemisphere there's the on season that it might be the off season in another part of the world, and that gear is always being used and not sitting in a cupboard for 3 or 4 months at a time. So
yeah. But the problem is, with satellite trackers, and in that particular case, you put them on for the winter migration or the pre-molt migration, and they're gone, and the chance that you ever get them back
is remote.
So you're putting them on for a one-off, and in fact, I think I got maybe 4 or 5 back from the 20 we deployed. So it's it's for the greater good. We want to learn more about them. We need to publish more papers. That's also a spare time job. That's once job is done and you have some money and food on the table, you go at night and fire up the computer again and write a paper.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm not publishing as fast as I would like to, but they are all on board. So there'll be co-authors in these scientific publications. And so that's kind of the pay, and plus the excitement and enthusiasm that we are learning new stuff. We're at, that's what science is about. We want to discover stuff we don't know yet, and not just anything, but stuff that can inform a better conservation strategy.
And it's really great. You mentioned you've got local businesses that operate in the region, in the broader region, that are helping you out, because getting into remote locations and spending time there and moving from location to location is wildly expensive. So we really need to congratulate those businesses for being involved. And
they're fantastic.
And please, bird people, if you are going to New Zealand, you need to look up these businesses. Ursula, here's your opportunity to let people know where they can book their tours or their helicopter flights. Who should they choose?
No, absolutely. Southern Discoveries in Milford Sound have been hugely helpful. And if you have the chance, they have the underwater observatory in Harrison Cove. So add that to your tour and have a look, go down into the fjord and become a part of the fjord environment, see black coral and other crazy things that you can't see anywhere in the world. So Southern Discoveries, certainly Fjordland Expeditions, Abu and Mandy down in the Southern Fjords, they do really cool tours. And they're one of several businesses that are helping, but they're probably the core. And I really want to shout out to the Greenstone helicopters on the West Coast. Without those guys, we would have never started working in these remote West Coast locations. So it's much appreciated. Yeah, we couldn't do that stuff without you.
There we are. Big thumbs up for all of you, because obviously they're making...
really important. Grant, I almost forgot, because with COVID, you can imagine currently boat tours, without tourists, there's just a fraction of the boats. And we started to do a lot more of our work with kayaking to these remote colony locations. So Roscoe's kayaks and Milford Sound came on board with these beautiful big sea kayaks and allowed us to take them out to the fjord entrance and land in crazy places where it's a bit challenging and a bit swell, and we would be gone for a few days before we bring those kayaks back. And we're really appreciating having access to those kayaks and thus those remote colonies.
Fantastic. Good on you, Roscoe.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, and I mean, I can't endorse any of these businesses because I haven't used any of them yet, but I would encourage you to, if you're making a selection, if you're going to New Zealand and doing tours, look them all up and remember making your choice that these are people who are obviously committed to the cause because they're supporting the cause with their real dollars.
So and conservation minded, yeah.
That's right. So it's important to support our fellow travellers. So do that. Ursula, is there anything that I have neglected to bring up in the discussion about Tawaki and penguins in New Zealand? I'm sure there is. So what comes to mind?
we could talk for a few more hours, I think. And in fact, when you first approached me, you said we're going to expand to seabirds in general because New Zealand is the seabird capital of the world. And we have so many endemic species nobody else has. And most of them are in dire straits. So, and most of them are very poorly researched. So we have a lot of work ahead of us to learn more about our seabirds here in New Zealand, and hopefully find the right ways to provide. I'm a scientist, so I want to provide data and be able to communicate the data that makes better outcomes for birds in New Zealand. And since I'm a seabird nerd, that's what I'd pledge for. Guys, we need to learn more about our seabirds. But even the seabirds we know a lot about, like the yellow-eyed penguins, they need a lot more help to even survive the next few decades here on the mainland. So we are about, and since this is the Bird Emergency Podcast, we talked about Tawaki that are doing quite great. And for me, it's kind of soul food to go out and they see them successfully raising their chicks. We have other penguins, especially the yellow-eyed penguin, that is struggling severely. And at the current projection, like we did some population modeling, and its trajectory is currently, the actual numbers we're counting is lower than the worst case population modeling forecast. So we're on track to lose them in the next couple decades if we are not getting our act together.
That sounds like there's a whole other podcast episode to talk about,
huge.
Particularly there. I mean, I approached you about Tawaki because I found the fantastic website, which, well, let's get that plug in there. Tawaki-project.org. That's where you'll find that. So just in case we forget later on. Now, you mentioned you're a seabird nerd, and New Zealand is the world capital of seabirds, I think. Did you see the talk on Twitter a week or so back that a New Zealand storm petrel was seen on a offshore bird watching trip in Tasmania?
No, I've missed that, but that is really cool. They like storm petrels are crazy. Like they I've seen them. I had the opportunity to work my way as a student, work my way back from New Zealand back to Europe 6 weeks, and the ship was so big that it didn't fit the Panama Canal. So we had to go around Cape Horn and the Cape Verdes and Falkland. It was quite an experience.
Bummer. What an inconvenience.
Yes, I saw so many cool birds. I yet have to go back to the Falkland Islands. But I've seen storm petrels like in 10-meter waves, crazy, just dancing around, doing their thing. And you're in this big ship. And that made me, before that, I tell you, I didn't know what bad weather was. So we have like force 11 from behind, and this big ship was surfing on the waves, and you think of Shackleton and their small little boats, and you go like, how the hell did they ever survive that? And there's these handful of tiny, fragile little storm petrels dancing on the waves and doing the thing, and just completely unfazed of this crazy storm that made kind of crazy waves. Like we had a 40-meter high bridge, and the waves smashed into us. Like it was insane, these roaring 40s and 50s, to experience the sheer force of the sea, and then realizing there's birds out there that are, so little and yet so capable, and survivors, real survivors. So if you ever feel small and down and thinking, how will you really deal with the next few days ahead, think of these storm petrels that just cope.
That's right. I really need to do more on storm petrels and shearwaters. They're pretty amazing.
They're amazing long-term travelers. They're absolutely stunning. Grant, have you ever? Oh no, I let you go. You want to wrap up?
No. I was just going to say there's World Albatross Day, but there's not World Storm Petrel Day. So
no.
Now, what were you going to say?
Oh, I'm just absolutely amazed when you stand ashore and see those fragile little birds zooming past, and then you imagine like it's really this sort of freedom. They pull you out, and our like sooty shearwaters, for example, who they nest in the millions around New Zealand, mostly on the predator-free islands. Like, yeah, they're all struggling with New Zealand must have looked so differently a couple hundred years ago. Anyway, but they take off and they go all the way up, to the Arctic, and then I zoom back around, and you have other birds, regularly going over to Chile, or even during the breeding season, Cook's petrels go down to Antarctica and back, and they're tiny and just these huge ocean wanderers. That live in both worlds, basically. They can fly for days with very little effort, but yet, the sooty shearwaters I just mentioned, they're amazingly adapted for diving as well. So they plunge and dive down 30, 40 meters, 50 meters sometimes, deeper than our little penguins. Mind you, like a proper penguin, like the Tawaki, goes more than 100 meters, or yellow penguin more than 150 meters if they want to. But like having a flying bird being able to dive like shearwaters, yet another really mind-boggling thing. I think like there's so much we still need to appreciate and learn about seabirds around this world, and they're inspiring.
It's really great how much more aware people are of seabirds, but we still know. Generally, as a community, we generally know nothing about seabirds and shorebirds for that instance. But hey, we're chipping away bit by bit and bringing them out from under the cloak of mystery, or it's almost the cloak of invisibility, isn't it? Particularly for things like storm petrels. I mean, I think the general public is pretty aware about shearwaters, because we know about mutton birds, and I certainly at primary school learnt about the amazing wedge-tailed shearwater journey around the world, and then you find, gee, most of the birds do something like that, but we just didn't know. And
like those little Arctic terns, going full circle almost.
Yeah, it's
flying to the moon during their lifetime. Yeah.
That's right. It's amazing. All right, let's tackle the bird emergency questions. Ursula, are you ready?
I don't know what you're going to throw at me, so I probably should have actually.
Then we don't get a rehearsed answer. Now you travel to many locations looking at birds, but. So we'll have to break this into two questions. When you're in New Zealand and you're just out in the field, what field guide do you take with you? I don't think you need one for penguins, but for general birding, what do you use to identify your New Zealand birds? To tell your tom tit from a tui.
See, the thing is, we have so few terrestrial birds here that general seabird guides are what I would use on a the Harrison on a ship. But if I'd go just somewhere into Fjordland and wanna look, in fact, if I have internet access, I very much like New Zealand Birds Online, because there you have like these little sound snippets and you can
you
look
have the calls.
and you have all the different, because there's different dialects depending on where you are, and it's just fun to explore. And I've also contributed. I've written a little blurb about the Tawaki in the New Zealand Birds Online webpage, so check that out. But
it's a really good resource. Yeah,
I absolutely love that. But if you insist on a book that you wanna take, see, books are always so heavy. Like I'm a lot in a backpack, so I don't often take books into the field. I must admit, I have my little diary, and then I take pictures if I get confused and come back and figure out stuff later, especially getting all my fish and other crazy, or my botany right.
Yeah.
But the Heather and Robertson, I think, is the standard bird guide I'd recommend for people that just come to New Zealand and want to learn more about New Zealand birds.
Okay. But title, has it got a good title, like The Birds of New Zealand?
It's just birds, I think.
Birds.
Birds. I'm not even sure. Is there New Zealand? There's got to be probably Birds of New Zealand. You're right. There's got to be New Zealand somewhere in the title. But
I was going to say that would be a good one to go shopping for in the bookshop.
Birds.
I'd like the book called Birds. And I'd go, what? Yes. Birds of New Zealand,
without
birds of the forest, birds.
Without the extirpated version of
That's right. That's right. The expurgated version. Sorry, if you don't know about Monty Python, that last bit made no sense to you whatsoever. And if you do know about Monty Python, you are reciting the rest of the skit, no doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, Ursula. Well, we've almost worked out the next question. It's not going to plan. So I'm guessing that your phone is like your must-have piece of kit for the field, or is it your notebook?
The phone, I have a little database in there where I record nest checks and everything. And then you just press sync and it's in the cloud, and you don't have to worry about transcribing. And with transponders, you just scan the number and you have it, and else you have like this 15-digit transponder number that's so error prone. Like back in the days when I started, I've been writing band numbers in these waterproof field books, and then you go back and say, you're not even a yellow-eyed penguin. You're some crazy other thing banded on some subantarctic islands. Where's my number? Twist, and you go back through the database and try to figure out what you've
got to work out what error you made with your China graph petrol.
Now these days you run around the forest like with a transponder gun, like these big things you use for cows usually, but you can kind of sneak up and often read birds. Like now they have, just like cats and dogs, they have a little transponder chip in their neck, and as you sneak up, you kind of poke around the corner and go zip of like a meter or so distance, and then you have the ID of the bird attending the nest, and it's straight in your database, and you don't need to worry about transcription errors. Unless you drop your phone into the sea, which has happened as well. But you try to avoid that.
And of course, we're not following the script. That gives an insight into what I really wanted to talk about a bit more, about the methods of retrieving data that is far less stressful than it used to be. You don't actually need to handle the birds to download the data off some of these devices, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
What's your bucket list location where you haven't been? Where let's give you the option. You can go to watch any birds, or you can pick a seabirding location. But where's somewhere that you're leaning back in your chair, dreaming? Oh, I'd love to go to see the curlews nesting in Siberia or what?
Oh, funny.
Where,
How do
where,
you know? Like I have a yeah, I've been working as a backcountry guide in the Norwegian Arctic and spent quite some time and had opportunity to work in the Siberian Arctic Yamal Peninsula in particular. But I'm so dreaming of going further east, and Kamchatka is a place that was always on my list, and I've never managed to get there. And so there's so many places around the world. I'd love the opportunity to work, actually, because I don't think I just want to travel. I want to contribute and want to be part of a project. And then, we, for example, in Siberia, we worked on scoters and long-tailed ducks and other seabirds, but there's all these other crazy birds that you then kind of pick up along the way and be really happy about. So it's always, you're out there and with open eyes, and I'm not a ticker as such. I really enjoy seeing birds and seeing them behave in their natural environment, not just go, it was tick. I got, my life list now is 400 something. It's more about actually spending time with them and seeing what they're doing. So yeah, spending some time in some really cool areas in Siberia and Kamchatka. I'd love to go back to Canada. I had a year there, but it's not nearly long enough. So there's lots of places I'd like to go back and visit, and certainly down in Patagonia. Like you mentioned, like I'm a bit attracted to those rougher areas of the globe. Sea and mountains and not so nice weather. But yeah, so I hope we have a seabird project kicking off in Chile that I'll have some more time spending down around those southern shores as well. So fingers crossed.
Well, dear listener, if you're a regular listener to the show, you will know that Ursula in that answer actually covered a couple of the next questions, so that was really good.
Oh, no.
And there's obviously so much more to talk to you about in your career and where you've been, but we'll have to do that another time. But you're going to have to tell me now, what's your bucket list bird?
Oh, that's too hard. Oh man, if I'd known.
Well, if you'd known, you would have had an answer just there, and it wouldn't have been half as much fun.
Yeah. See, because it's always hard to just narrow it down on that one bird. Something achievable and close. I haven't seen a New Zealand stone petrel yet. Can you believe that?
Well, I can, because unless you're heading up to the Gulf on the North Island regularly, you're not going to. That's where they hang out most. But otherwise, it's going to be a chance sighting, because they just they just disperse. They just go.
Yeah, and they're tiny and easily missed. So I think
that's a good choice. I think that's a good choice. So but the hardest question is coming up.
Oh no. Harder still.
Yeah, harder still. This is the hardest question.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best bird?
There's no best bird.
Correct. Correct. There is no best bird. Every bird is the best bird. Thank you very much for that. Yes. All right. What's the best penguin? There we go.
See, like, I'm biased, so I'm really in love with those crested penguins, and I particularly like Tawaki. But I'm looking forward to spending more time with erect cresteds as well. I know very little about those, so maybe in a year's or two time, so you'll find me just bragging about how beautiful erect crested penguins are. But currently, Tawaki, they have my heart. What can I say? But back to your best bird thing, there's some birds that are best at certain things and others are best at other things. And I absolutely love, for example, the Atlantic puffins, because that's kind of the seabird that got me into being chasing seabirds. when I was 9 and just coming along like around Norway and kayaking in the Lofoten Islands. And as you come closer to those seabird islands, they're like beehives, and you see like all these birds zooming around, and you come closer, and then you have these cliff nesting seabirds that are all black and white and not very interesting for a little girl. And then you have the puffins, and they just caught me, and I absolutely fell in love. And just then we had a sea eagle swooping past and grabbing a puffin out of the air. But because we are there, human disturbance, it got distracted and dropped it almost into my lap. So I had him, straight away dead. Then a very unhappy puffin, and I felt for it. But that was kind of the first connection, and seeing all the combinations of, birds do what birds do to stay alive, and they're all beautiful.
I'm sure the auks and the guillemots are really, really, really happy with your description of the black and white birds.
So you could apply that to penguins, and people got really now get hate mail. Oh no!
I know. But bird nerd hate mail. We don't want any of that.
No, please don't.
Ursula, I hope you'll speak to me again sometime where maybe we can talk about those early years in the northern hemisphere, learning about seabirds. Listeners will probably, hopefully, be happy to know that 21st of February. Hopefully, I've got this out by then, Ursula. If not, it's revisionist. But starting on the 21st of February, we'll be back to Monday Megaphones, where we have a sort of panel discussion about issues in conservation and birds and whatnot. So that would be a bit like Desert Island Discs, but with birds. And we can maybe talk about your career and how you ended up in New Zealand, perhaps.
Well, it's the seabird capital. Where else could I be?
That's right. That's right. And so it makes perfect sense. Ursula Ellenberg in Dunedin in New Zealand, thanks so much for joining me on the Bird Emergency, talking about the amazing Tawaki penguin. There's going to be lots of information, and Ursula's going to send me some lovely visuals that we can put in there, so you can learn more about Tawaki. And of course, tawaki-project.org is where you will find everything about Tawaki, and there's some great resources about penguins in New Zealand generally if you search. Ursula, you mentioned that you're on Twitter. If people want to check out your timeline and perhaps some real-time updates on what you're seeing or hearing about, what's your Twitter handle?
It's at ULNBERG. It's the shortest I could think of. So,
very good. Very
because
good.
you don't want to waste characters. I'm old Twitter, so where you had very limited characters. So it's at ULNBERG, and I must admit I'm not spending nearly enough time on Twitter. I really enjoy catching up on a weekend, but when I'm in the field and have reception, I'd tweet some crazy fieldwork pics, and but it's very occasional. You don't get swamped with information.
Yeah, no, that's like unlike my Twitter feed.
Yes.
Yours is always impactful and important when there's something out there. So that's great.
Usually pictures, yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's all. That always makes Twitter fun. Ursula, I often repeat this, but do you know that there's a bird nerd in New Zealand who has the best Twitter handle that there possibly could be?
Tell me.
Well, I'm assuming you are acquainted with Steph Burrell.
Yes, absolutely.
And do you know her Twitter handle?
I have it in my Twitter line. But I can't remember her handle at the moment. No.
Petrol station.
Oh, true. And yes, petrol station.
And
I remember back in the days, I thought, like, why would you have station there?
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then you realise that's what we call them everywhere. Like, we're going down the petrol station.
Yes.
So there we go. Steph still is the winner of Twitter, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Cheers. Yeah.
All right, well, we've done the goodbyes, but let's do them again. Thanks, Ursula. I'm Grant Williams. This is the Bird Emergency. That's Ursula Ellenberg talking to us from New Zealand. I hope you've enjoyed our little chat about penguins. See you next time. Bye. Oh, there we go. That can go. I'm back. I think I'm substantially lagged again, so that's a bit of a bummer. Look, I'm moving, but I'm not moving on the screen. Although maybe I'm catching up. So that was fun, wasn't it? Ursula has reminded me of so many things that I want to follow up on in Birds in New Zealand. Yeah, that was a really fun discussion. Did you get something out of it? Anything out of it? Dun, 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 dun. Waiting patiently. You've probably you may have fallen asleep. There are a few things came up in that discussion that I might pop a few more things on replay for tonight and tomorrow. Oh, excuse me. Need a nap though. Desperately need a nap, I think. I think I will play for you tomorrow. I'll set it up. We'll maybe tell me a good time. 10:30 in the morning, midday, 3 o'clock in the afternoon for the rodenticide discussion that I had with Holly and Dr. Maggie Watson. That's probably going to be pride of place for tomorrow. There we go. Thanks. Let's pop that up, Naomi. Good. Yes, you like the chat. That was good. That was. You just reminded me, Naomi. That was something I have on my list of things to do. Is actually follow up those businesses, contact them, and actually tell them that I appreciate the support that they've been giving the Tawaki project in general. And maybe a tour guide Thursday on the tour company there might be nice, might be fun. So yeah, Naomi, just let me know what is morning tomorrow or midday or afternoon better, because you want the rodenticide episode, so I'd like to play it when you're likely to be available. So give me an idea and I'll set it up shortly. I'll set it up and then I'll probably have a nap. Oh, Happy New Year, everyone. Oh. Okay, midday's a suggestion. All right, so that's what we'll do. I will write that down so I don't mess up. Midday. Maggie Watson. Okay. All right, lovely spending a couple of hours with you again there, or just about a couple of hours. So enjoy your evening. I will play something else. I don't know what, but I will. And excuse me, you'll get your notifications out and catch you on the flip side, as they say. Thanks, Naomi. Bye.